What a game. What a game that became. And we have a lot to talk about here. The Pittsburgh Steelers lose to the Los Angeles Chargers 41-37 in Los Angeles, a game the Chargers for a while were trying to find a way to lose during a Steelers comeback, and then turned it on at the end and managed to steal the Steelers comeback from them and win a game the Chargers really needed to win, but a game the Steelers also needed to win, and they did not. Again, the Steelers lose to the Chargers 41-37. This is your Steelers postgame show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now. Head over to Steelers Now for the game recap and all our coverage as we wait for the video reaction from the pressers. None of us are in Los Angeles, obviously, so we got to wait to have that up. We got this show for you. I'm Mike Asti and our Nick Farabaugh joining me, and many of you here as well. So feel free to chat along. We'll try to get to you, but we also got a lot to talk about ourselves, so I can't make any promises. And Nick, I kind of got to start it here because this was the focus of the broadcast. This is what Chris Collinsworth was hammering home, especially at the end, on what ended up being the game-winning touchdown with Minkah Fitzpatrick not in that coverage. Obviously, the Steelers entered this game incredibly banged up. That was why they started so slow. That was why the Chargers entered this game feeling like they were going to get a victory. They had a 6.5-point spread advantage and then a big lead early on in this game. How much did the Steelers' injuries and key losses, especially on defense, impact this game? And do you agree with the broadcast that if Minkah Fitzpatrick, TJ Watt, etc., were able to be a part of this game, it would have been a Steelers victory? Was it simply the Steelers were so banged up, they were too undermanned to deal with a team like LA?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was a huge part of this game. I mean, when you look at overall, what was the issue for the Steelers today? Defensively, communication on the back end. Obviously, that last one was a busted coverage between Sutton and Norwood. It doesn't happen with Minkah and Joe Hayden in there. I mean, it just doesn't. The pass rush, they really didn't have any. I mean, they got a little bit going at the end, but it was really just Cam Hayward and Alex Highsmith making things happen. If they have TJ Watt, you probably get more, right? I mean, Watt's going up against Storm Norton the entire game at right tackle. And if Highsmith was able to do what he did to him, I can only imagine what TJ Watt would be able to do to him. So you look at just kind of the whole scope. Absolutely was huge. I mean, the defense just didn't look good. They just didn't look like they had the talent to match the LA at all, right? They had a few key stops, but it felt like it was more through grit. It was more through heart. It wasn't as much through, man, they really out-talented these guys. I didn't feel like they had that talent level both on the back end and up front. Of course, they were missing – 4 D linemen as well, not just TJ, but they were missing 2 at Alu. Carlos Davis is still out. Isaiah Loudermilk pulled a groin. So you look at that as well. They missed them. And I'll also say this, I think offensively, man, they really missed Kevin Dotson badly, especially on that last drive. You kind of saw, Dotson is out. Hassenauer then gets hurt, and then you have to throw Joe Hagan at guard when he hasn't played guard much at all this year, and he gives up 2 very key sacks to Joey Bosa coming in on the inside. And again, it's hard to kind of trust Haig in that spot, and I don't know how much I can blame him, but it's big and significant. And going back to that Watt point, kind of on Storm Norton, when he was facing Norton tonight, 1.5 sacks, 3 quarterback hits, 6 pressures. So you can imagine what TJ Watt would have done in that role instead. So certainly they missed a lot of their guys. I don't think the Chargers put up anywhere near 41 with Watt, Hayden, Fitzpatrick, and those guys in there.
And this is a Chargers team that had been struggling entering this game. It almost seemed like the same old Chargers where they'd get out to a lead and then blow the game. That's what they've been doing the past month, really, of their season after a hot start for LA. And then it really feels like, in particular, TJ and Minkah not being there, if anybody not being there, that's the biggest deal. Obviously, what TJ Watt brings to the pass rush, and then Minkah certainly in coverage, certainly at the end. Minkah's had his warts. We talked about it in past post-game shows earlier this season. He's not what he was maybe even a couple years ago, but still certain coverages like that, trying to make a splash play, even getting in the mind of a young quarterback like Justin Herbert. I think that's something that's lost in all of this too. He was able to even be more comfortable knowing that he doesn't have the defensive player of the year coming at him. He doesn't have an all-pro going all over the field, coming at him, he has to worry about. And of course, Hayden, etc. It was definitely a problem. The Chargers able to get back their questionable players and have them in this game, Joey Bosa and company. Chargers do get the win 41-37 here. This is our Steelers post-game show on PSL and Steelers Now. Nick Farabaugh. I'm Mike Asti. Now, I do want to also ask you, because the impact of the Steelers' loss is really, really clear, but we had to hit on it because that was what was talked about so much, and especially at the end. If nothing else, that touchdown, the game winner, seemed like that right there was a perfect example of Sutton in a situation he wasn't supposed to be in, totally mismanaged coverage there, and it wouldn't happen to Minka and Hayden, as you mentioned. What happened for the Steelers to allow them to come back in this game and make this a game that we're going to have a lot to talk about? Because for a while, this was a sleeper. It looked like the Chargers were going to run away with it. The Steelers couldn't get going on offense. Najee was basically all that was happening on offense. Ben was having one of those slow starts to a half. Chase Claypool had some blunders early on. And then all of a sudden, it becomes the best Steelers offense we've seen in a very long time. Is that the Chargers in the midst of one of their usual collapses, or did something the Steelers do happen? And did they actually have an eureka moment that they maybe figured something out and can carry that on for future weeks?
I think that's going to be a wait and see game. It really is, because this was also the sharpest we've seen Ben play in a while. I mean, Ben played a good game today. He made a few really nice throws. He had his moments where you were like, okay, Ben, what are you doing? But he also made some really, really nice plays. And down the stretch, it was a great team effort as well. The blocked punt kind of kickstarted everything, I feel like. That really was the momentum changer. And then the Chargers helped, obviously, with the penalty down there on 4th and goal with Claypool, and it kind of gave the Steelers life, right? So the Chargers certainly helped. But the Steelers did start to figure out something offensively. The crossing routes, they attacked the middle of the field with a vengeance today. I mean, they really did. The crossers, the deep seam to Ebron. They had a few really big targets to the middle of the field that I've never seen them target them under Fietner or Ben, with Ben in a while, right? So the middle of the field finally opened up for the Steelers, and it was like a eureka moment for them with that. And I think that was a big catalyst for it all. They really didn't get much from the running game all game. I mean, Najee was decent at times, but he was a non-factor really in the second half outside of the touchdown.
In the second half, in the first half, he had 38 and then about 20 yards as a receiver. So when you think about it, for a half, that's not bad, even if it's not elite football. But then you do nothing in the second half. There was basically nothing from him in the second half when the offense turned it on.
Yeah, he basically did nothing. I mean, it was really Deontay Johnson playing a phenomenal game. He's grown into really a great receiver. Claypool had a few big catches. Ebron had a really nice 2-catch sequence. They had a sequence where they were going there, where everyone was playing at a high level. The offensive line was protecting Ben. Ben was throwing well. The receivers were getting open. They were calling plays well. Canada and Ben seemed to be in sync with each other. And then the defense was just making some really key plays that they needed to make on money downs. And that was the big thing for this team. So overall, I mean, that's kind of what it did. I mean, the Chargers certainly helped out with the penalties, but the Steelers also changed things offensively, where you look at those middle of the field openers and just overall the talent level that they played at today. It was the best that they had. And I think it's going to be kind of remain to be seen if they can carry this. It's going to be, can Ben keep this up and can everyone else keep this up? But if they can, and when they start to get healthy defensively, I think that's where you can come from a positive with this. Maybe Watt and Minka, they're probably going to have Minka back next week. If Watt's back, if they get Hayden back soon, then you could be building something. Maybe the Steelers, as they go through this gauntlet of their schedule, maybe they can tough out a few wins.
Yeah, and Cincinnati coming up here. And this also was a game that I think is textbook, tale of two halves, but that's why you lose in the NFL. It does, especially against the good team, but it doesn't matter who you're facing. It's a talented Chargers team, but against anyone in the NFL, if you start out slow and then all of a sudden have an eureka moment, you're still vulnerable to lose, because the Chargers didn't have to do that much in the second half to eventually secure the win. They only had a couple solid possessions, a play or two that went their way. Of course, the blown coverage that led to the touchdown in the second half after having such a bad half. But that was enough for them to get the victory due to their big lead in the first half, and the Steelers taking a while to get going. Certainly, it was just too little too late, even with the comeback by Pittsburgh to at one point tie the game. Nick Farabaugh here, Mike Asti. The Steelers do lose to LA here on Sunday Night Football, 41-37. Pittsburgh now 5-4-1 on the year. And this a day also that the rest of the division picks up victories. And the Browns, Ravens, they weren't impressive in their wins, but they did win. And in the NFL, winning is certainly better than not. And certainly the important thing, the Browns getting a victory over the Lions, 13-10, a similar game to what Pittsburgh dealt with against Detroit a week ago. But that was a tie for the Steelers. The Browns did get the victory. So that's certainly a big deal. Now, we talked about Matt Canada's play calling and this team and Ben Roethlisberger and this offense having that eureka moment. And it really felt like from coaching all the way down, it was an eureka moment in the second half. We will see if it carries over. Ben finishes 28 for 44, 273, 3 touchdowns, no picks, 3 sacks, a quarterback rating of 103.7 with no practice. So no practice, Ben, no problem for the Steelers, and certainly a better performance than the Steelers could have got out of Mason or Dwayne or anyone else really that they possibly could have put in there. Without him, it would have been a problem in this game. Najee only 39 yards on the ground, though. I believe 38 of them in the first half, because when I did that story on him surpassing 1,000 total yards, he had 38 on the ground at that point. Deontay Johnson, 7 for 101, an average of 14.4 per, a touchdown, a 32-yarder. Chase, 5 for 93. Ebron, 3 for 24. Harris does have 5 for 20 as a receiver. Again, Freiermuth only 4 for 11, but has the score. So everyone getting involved, but I do want to go back to the first half because that was when everyone was struggling and they were sluggish. What are your thoughts on that decision by Matt Canada, the play call there on the 4th and 1, number one, to not take the points, Tomlin's decision there, and then going into Matt Canada's decision on what play to call, where they didn't give it to Najee. They gave it to him later, but didn't give it to him there. And when, Nick, you know this, when you have a game like this against a good team and it's a close game, it sucks to say this, but that one decision could have cost them this game, even though they eventually came back and turned it on and almost won. Yeah,
well, I think that the biggest issue of today's game offensively for the Steelers was the red zone offense by a mile. Because you look at the sequence you point out, I think that Tomlin made the correct call. Go for it. I go for it every time in that situation. Okay. The issue is you don't call a fade. First of all, you don't call a fade on 3rd and goal because you don't if you call a fade on 3rd and goal, you're playing it like you're going for a field goal. That's my point. And I don't know if there was a lack of communication between Tomlin and Canada, because obviously Canada's up in the booth and Tomlin's on the sideline. But if that's what you were going for, then kick the ball. And then the 4th down play, I mean, there was just nothing that said that shovel was going to work. Once you see Freiermuth in that wing formation, he's going to get the shovel. And Derwin James read it like a book. It was just an awful sequence for them. It really, really, really bad play calling by Matt Canada there. And then also, they do get bailed out by the penalty, obviously, but that was also a bad sequence. They didn't run Najee once until obviously he gets the touchdown.
Canada almost got bailed out by Najee's touchdown there. That almost was a same scenario Canada issue again, and they end up actually getting in the end zone.
Absolutely. That was the same issue. Canada didn't call good red zone plays until you look at, the screen to Freiermuth. That was a good call. Chooks gets a good block. He kind of uses the strong side to draw everyone to the other side, and Freiermuth's wide open. But he didn't call a good game in the red zone. That's the big thing. And then you also just look at, I feel like, Canada's overall lack of ability to consistently go back to the same plays in the middle of the field. I felt like they didn't attack the middle of the field enough today. And then they should have kept going into those crossers. And especially on that last play, before Boz kicked the field goal to go ahead 37-34, they try a double move to hit him deep. And I don't know why you would try to go deep on that play. I get you trust Deontay Johnson, but the Chargers had been getting a lot of pressure on them in the fourth quarter by running Boza up the middle. And if you just hit them on a
Deontay did get through the defense, though, and almost got in the end zone at the end there.
He did. And that's kind of what set it up and everything. But also, Schobert gets the key stop on 4th. You gotta extend the drive. I mean, you just can't give them 3+ minutes with the way your defense has been playing. I know that they were hyped up and everything, but that defense was absolutely undermanned. And you knew. I I get taking the points. Honestly, if I were Tomlin, I might have considered going for it there. I might have, because listen, you're playing to win the game, and I couldn't trust the defense. I just couldn't trust the defense. Like, that would have been a matter of trust, but I understand the call to go for the field goal, but I don't understand the call from Canada on third down.
What I don't get is the inconsistency, I guess, in these decisions. At one point, you decide to go for it. You don't take the points. You go for it. Then in a similar scenario, you're taking the points. You're not going for it. So basically, and Tomlin always says this, he doesn't want to live in his fears. So sometimes he lives in his fears. Sometimes he does not live in his fears. And in this game, you're dealing with a defense that just was undermanned and not going to be able to get critical stops. They did at times in this game. Cam Hayward making an out of this world play, which included some luck, but it wasn't going to be a game won by this defense. Everyone knew that. I'm sure Tomlin even knew that entering this game. So it's just the inconsistency for me. I mean, I could argue maybe taking the point, especially in a close game like this. If you're not going to take the points, that play call made no sense. You have an elite running back who just surpassed 1,000 total yards a little bit ago. You might as well trust him to get one. I think he would certainly be the most apt to be able to get one. We know they're not going to let Ben fall down for that yard, but just the play choice seemed weird and seemed the least possible effectiveness. And then again, you make the opposite decision later that you're alluding to. So that's what I don't get. They're similar scenarios. You get two different decisions. I'm not really sure on which camp Tomlin's in terms of going through off analytics or just kind of going gut feeling. He does both in the middle of games. So that's kind of the weirdness of some of these decisions here. But yeah, it almost won this game. It did not end up winning this game, despite the Steelers being undermanned. They do lose to the Chargers 41-37. Now, I do also want to ask you here, because you're somebody that has been around Matt Canada a while. You certainly were able to watch him at Pitt. He's now going to certainly be the talk of this coming week and onward. And he had been the talk of most of this season. He had been blamed by many for the issues of this offense. And we even did a show earlier in the year, and we both agree that was kind of unreasonable at that point. Steelers fans were getting on him 2 weeks into the season, wanting him fired. That was a bit much. You needed time to let his system get in there. You needed certain players and blocking and all of that to occur. The offensive line has improved, even though they're still missing critical pieces and not great. The tight ends have emerged. Ben certainly played well in this game overall. As much as you really could ask for from the offense in this game with how banged up this team was. And yet it appears there's still something in Canada that doesn't allow this offense to just click on all cylinders. How would you evaluate Matt Canada overall this season? Is it now time to be able to fairly criticize him and say that he is an issue for this team? Can he still fix this? Did we see a Matt Canada fix that if he, gets in that right frame of mind and maybe listens to Ben or Tomlin in that second half, that could carry over? But just how would you grade Canada overall? Because now we're deep enough into the season. This is a fair conversation. I don't think it was early on in the year when some were having it, but I do think it is now.
Well, I think you have to evaluate Canada through the lens of what he has. And
that's true.
Today he had a quarterback that was dealing for the most part, especially in that second half. He had a pretty talented group of receivers, at least talented enough to do real damage, and they did do damage. And he had an offensive line that, while a little undermanned, they played well for the most part. They played well enough. The offensive line was not abjectly horrible outside of the run blocking. Here's the thing. Matt Canada, I don't hold a ton of the issues early in the season to him. As the season has gone on, the offensive line has started to at least improve from terrible to below average. And then you still have Ben getting in a little bit of a groove. Najee gets more comfortable. You get all these guys going.
Right.
You can start to put some things on Ken. You can start to say, okay, that's a coaching point. And today I think is the most clear example of Matt Canada not coaching well. I mean, his red zone calls have not been good all year. And I think that's the big thing that you look at with Matt Canada. He hasn't had great red zone calls. Every now and then he'll have one or two where you're like, there we go. There's Matt Canada. That's a great call.
And I think we saw that in the second half. So is there that
eureka screen?
Right. Is there that eureka moment with Matt Canada as a play caller, as well as this offense overall, that if someone can get in a closed door room and say, Matt, there it is, do that all game, then the offense could click? Is there that hope?
There could be, because he also came out with the idea, let's attack the middle of the field, let's get these crossers going, and they had great success with them. I feel like this is the thing with Matt Canada, and it's kind of how I keep looking at him. I think he's a guy that is able to raise the floor of offenses, especially this one. I think that they could be a lot worse with this offense than they are.
That's
a
fair.
lot worse.
Sure.
And I think he's a good guy that can raise your floor and at least keep you on this line. But I don't think he's going to go like that. I don't think he's a guy that raises your ceiling, because he's going to have these abject failures every game, and you're going to scratch your head a few times and wonder what the heck he's doing. And this is something not that he has had just in Pittsburgh. He's had it throughout his college career. It's partially why he got ran out of LSU. And you look at it all, and that's kind of what Canada is. This is who Canada is. And I think you're going to have to take a guy who might be a less upside type of play caller, but he can be a guy that at least raises your floor. So it's a trade-off, but there's definitely issues with Matt Canada. I think you can blame a lot of their troubles, at least in the red zone today, on him. I think a lot of it was play call related and not personnel related.
Yeah, and again, you maybe have to grade the offensive line on a curve, and maybe even this team on a curve, maybe even Ben on a curve, but Ben was certainly good enough to win this game, certainly good enough to say the very least. The offensive line played better than they even have in recent weeks without some key players. And I don't know if you could ask for much more in terms of the personnel under the circumstances, but yeah, I do think there were some decisions you could point to. Obviously, they're not going to fire him mid-season, but I do think the conversation about Matt Canada is now fair, where it really wasn't early on in the season, because he had to get his feet wet. And I'm sure Steelers fans aren't going to like hearing, though, that he raises a floor but doesn't allow you to get a high enough ceiling, because this team was supposed to be in win now mode. There's a lot of talent there. You have an aging quarterback that potentially is in his last year, certainly in one of his last years. You don't really have time to just raise a floor. They needed more potentially from this team, but maybe there's a eureka moment in that second half, because it definitely was different from him all the way down through the offense in that second half. The Steelers do lose, though, 41-37 to the Chargers, as now they're fighting in a pretty packed AFC North, really a division with a bunch of average teams, but they're kind of jam-packed. The Steelers will have a chance to rebound with a division opponent coming up. In fact, 2 division opponents coming up. Those are big wins. I mean, at minimum, they got to split those, if not try to win both of those, to really have a chance at the postseason based on the situation right now. I do want to go to the chat now. I do see some chat action here. We have Philip Palmer. That game was exciting, stressful, and something we should be pleased about. Okay, the Steelers showed we could score a lot of points with our offense, but they showed we needed why. Yeah, I mean, I think that's all pretty clear. We touched on a lot of that. Obviously, the offense eventually clicked, but they clearly were missing some key critical men on that defense that just didn't allow them to get this victory, and the Chargers to do enough. I kind of can piggyback off of that, though, and ask you the question, Nick, that can you take a glass half full take after this game because of the comeback, because of the turnaround in the second half, because they did it so undermanned, because the Chargers are a team that people expect to be in the postseason despite their recent losing streak? They are a good, talented team. Potentially, could you take it like Philip is and say, hey, I'm leaving this game pleased with the Steelers despite losing? Is that possible under the circumstances?
I mean, it is. The question is, if I wanted to be truly pleased, I would be saying, okay, I know that's the moment the offense has been looking for. Now I can consistently say the offense is going to score, 21 plus each week. I don't think I could say that just yet, because as I've been saying, I don't know if Ben's going to consistently play this well each week. This is the best we've seen Ben since week 6-5 of 2020. I mean,
it's been a while. Yeah, it's been a while.
Maybe the second half of the Colts game.
Especially when you include efficiency, because we've seen more yards, but this is an efficient Ben Roethlisberger.
Yes, he was a really efficient guy. And you look at all those advanced analytics like EPA, whatever, those types, he is graded out well. So he had a really good game on pretty much all fronts. He passed the eye test. He passed his analytics. I'm certain he's going to pass the film. He looked really good tonight. But is he going to look this good every week? Or are we going to get, the guy that showed up against Cincinnati, or the guy that showed up in Green Bay, or something like that, right? Or are they going to get that guy to come back? Or is this Ben hitting a hot stretch? And is this Ben hitting his stride? I don't know. I don't know what it is. The other thing is Matt Canada going to actually improve and build around his team? The other other big thing is, while you can come away looking from this and say, cool, we have a pretty good offense now, and the defense sucks, but they're going to get those guys back. When are they getting those guys back?
Yeah.
When does Joe Hayden get back?
Yeah.
Is TJ Watt going to come back next week? He didn't practice at all this week.
No, and it looked bad. We were at the stadium. That looked knee on knee at the time. Many people in the press box were saying, "Oh man, that's a year-ending injury." Doesn't appear that way, but I wouldn't be shocked if he's out at least 2 to 4.
Exactly, and you know, I guess the good news is they haven't gone on IR. But
right.
Do they get Watt back?
They will at some point if they're not playing. They got to make a move or something.
Exactly. And next week is huge. I mean, these next 2 weeks are actually huge because they have Baltimore and Cincinnati. Yeah. Obviously, Baltimore is, I think, the 5th, and then they're at Cincinnati next week. That's a must-win game. They have to beat Cincinnati. I mean, they have to.
Yeah.
It's a must-win game. So they need Watt. They need all these guys to play. They need Watt and at least Minka. They'll get Minka. The 10-day timeline, they will get him. So they'll at least have Minka. They might have Loudermilk. Maybe they'll have Carlos Davis.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe they'll get some reinforcements on the line. But are they going to have Watt? Are they going to have Hayden? I don't know. So can you look at this, please? Yes. The only question is it a sustainable thing? And that's the question about the offense. Are they going to come out next week and look like the same old offense? Or are we going to see this same offense? Now, if they start to build on it and they show up, hey, next week, this is the same offense, then I can say, come out, please. But let's wait and see. I think for right now, cautiously optimistic come out of it.
Yeah, I think cautiously optimistic is fair after that second half. And again, you are undermanned. I'll say this, it would have been a bigger loss for the Chargers the way this game unfolded than it ends up being for the Steelers. The Steelers still need to win these coming up games. They're still in a log jam in the AFC North. But if the Chargers would have lost this, that would have been 4 out of 5, in which they blew a lead in the second half. They were facing a team that's undermanned. They had a big lead. They have a young stud quarterback, not an aging one. I mean, this would have been a backbreaker the Chargers might not have been able to overcome. So they do, especially with the Chiefs winning today, they're not looking good, but they're somehow crawling out and getting these victories. So the Chargers needed to win this game. And it doesn't make any Steeler fan feel better, but they had to win. And when you have a big enough lead, you don't have to do that much in the second half. The Chargers do get the victory. So they're certainly still alive over in the West. The Steelers alive in the North, but they do have those games coming up. And many could argue that Bengals game was a must win due to loss earlier in the year, maybe even more important than the Ravens game, which will then follow. And the schedule doesn't get much easier down the stretch. Now, is it just about uncertainty? Is it just about health that causes you to have pause? I mean, what would you say? And I agree with you, but what would you say to anybody that maybe would argue you're being too critical because the offense did play so well in the second half that say, if we get this Ben again, and I don't know if there's reason to believe we wouldn't, except for the fact that it's been inconsistency that we've seen from Ben over the last year and a half. But hypothetically, if Ben plays like this, the receivers play like this, figuring Najee would even be better than this because we saw it even a week ago. And if the play calling maybe gets less hectic, then why would they not have expectations to at least be better? Defensively, if they're not healthy, they're probably screwed. But what would you say to maybe you're just kind of being too cautious and maybe too pessimistic when the second half did show that this is possible? Like, why would they change from what they did in the second half? Anyone smart, you would think, would carry that on.
It's just one half. That's why. I mean,
literally, true.
It's a whole trend. Like, we have seen this offense this whole year. This is the first time we have seen this offense look like this.
Weren't you surprised that we saw it in this game, though? I was shocked that we were seeing this.
I was shocked too. But listen, it's possible. But I will also say this. I think the cover 2 Brandon Staley's type of scheme is a really good matchup for the Steelers offense. It's the same scheme essentially that the Broncos run, and the Steelers put up 27 on Denver. Just coincidentally, probably the 2 best games they played on offense this year are Denver and this one. I'm just saying they're not going to face 2 high teams every week. So we'll see how they look against Cincinnati, who's going to run a lot of single high, and we'll see. They'll run a lot of single high. They'll run 2 high, but not like these guys do.
Yeah.
Not like these guys. Also, I'll say this, another pessimism thing. The run game was awful. just abysmal. They can't win every week with Ben throwing it like this because he's not going to throw it like this every week.
No. And there's that stat that everyone hammers home that when Ben throws it more than 35 times, the win-loss record is not what you want it to be. He threw 44 passes in this game, and he had a really efficient night, but it would even have been more efficient if you cut down those passes by even 5.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of chat activity now on Justin Herbert as an MVP candidate, Herbert being so great, Justin Herbert being a hard quarterback to deal with. But it's going to be a string of Joe Burrow figuring Lamar Jackson will be back for the Ravens. I mean, you're looking at Herbert, Burrow, and Lamar Jackson 3 straight weeks. That's a tough schedule for anybody in the NFL.
Yeah, and then you turn back on Thursday night, I think, and go to Minnesota play Cousins. So
yeah, and I don't know if I put Cousins with them, but
he's not with them, but he's a capable quarterback.
He's not bad. Sure,
yeah,
right.
I will say this: I think that Herbert played an unreal game, and I thought some of those big, the 3rd and 13 conversion. I think it was on the first drive of the third quarter. This looked like the Steelers had him. That was just an unreal throw. It wasn't bad coverage. He just threw a bazooka in there to Keenan Allen. But I do want to say, like, back to your point of like, why wouldn't they keep it up? The trends just showcase that. The coaching really wasn't good tonight. I thought the defensive coaching wasn't that good. They finally decided to move Highsmith away from Rashawn Slater, which was good. Right. But they never put a spy on Herbert, which was odd, to say the least. And I'll say this, and again, it's just those trends, right? Like, why should I believe that they're going to show up this good every week? Why should I think that Ben's going to play this well? Should I think that the offensive line is going to regress? I think the offensive line is going to positively regress, like back to the mean a little bit. I think that they'll come out next week, run the ball better. I don't expect it to be 18 for 55. I expect it to be a decent running performance next week. What does that look like? If Ben continues to play at this high level and they get a better Najee, I can see it happening. But there's just so much data out there. There's so much film. There's so much that we've watched that you just can't say one half and you're like, it's fixed like that. There's still things to be concerned about.
Yeah, and even with the Eureka and the surprise of it, yeah, it's true.
Yes, and don't forget that the Chargers helped out a lot with some really dumb penalties. I mean, a ton of offsides, the DPI on 4th and goal. There were a lot of bad penalties they committed. So that also will help out the Steelers a little bit. I don't think
there's a reason why they've been blowing games. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think it was like the main factor the Steelers came back or drove the ball. I think the Steelers, independent of that, drove the ball really well tonight. Yeah. But it's a concerning factor that you also have to take into consideration. Where like, is this sustainable? And I guess we'll see.
Yeah, Nick Farabaugh, Mike Asti here, Steelers postgame show on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now. Head over to Steelers Now for the game recap and stay here to this channel for any of our video reaction as we are waiting for that here with Mike Tomlin and company. Speaking after this game, the Steelers do lose to the Chargers 41-37. You want efficiency, Nick. We talked about Ben being efficient, maybe a rare efficient game from Big Ben. You can't ask for more. Justin Herbert, 30 for 41, 73%. 382, 3 TDs, did have a pick, sacked only twice on a quarterback rating of 116.1. Ben's efficiency pales in comparison to that efficiency. That's MVP level efficiency. I'm not saying he's going to win the award this year because they have blown some games, but that was a great performance by Herbert. He did what he had to do, especially at the end. And yeah, the Steelers coverage was blown there on the game winner, but he caught him at the perfect time. That was a smart throw. And with so many quarterbacks in his draft class that were highly touted, he maybe is the best one. I mean, we've seen that now, offensive rookie of the year a year ago. So it's not going to get easier though with Burrow, Lamar Jackson, even Cousins. This isn't like last year when they faced a bunch of backup quarterbacks. They are facing starters. They are facing Pro Bowlers. They are facing former MVPs. They are facing guys that are probably going to win an MVP at some point in the future, offensive rookies of the year, etc. It's not going to be easy for the Steelers. Now, flipping it to the defensive side of the football here, and obviously the defense was an issue in this game. Obviously, they were banged up. So the offense did enough. We can say we're not sure if they're going to carry this on, but if you put up 37 points, you should be able to certainly have a chance to win a game. The offense did enough, certainly in the second half, despite the slow start. But defensively, it was a problem. And we talked about a lot of players that are missing and the issues with them not being there, and we don't know if they're going to come back. I do want to talk about somebody that was there, and he's been there. But I think maybe he also needs put in a milk carton because I'm not sure if we can find him, and that's Devin Bush. What can be done with Devin Bush, because if you're going to deal with so many injuries, they're going to rely on Devin Bush and company even more. And this is another performance by Devin Bush that is likely going to get him killed by Pittsburgh media for another week. I'm not, obviously his father doesn't like it. He's appeared on shows talking about it, but what can be done to try to help him be better, especially if Watt's going to be out and miss more time, especially if you're going to have issues in the secondary with injuries? Bush could have an impact, but it's just not there, and he's impacting games now negatively.
I'll tell you what, Devin Bush is a guy that does not look like who he used to be. And I said this multiple times. The guy I saw at Michigan, the guy I saw his rookie year, he just is not playing the same way. He looks tentative. He doesn't look like he trusts his eyes. He doesn't look like he trusts his knee. He doesn't look like he's playing confident at all. He's like second guessing himself. I'll also say this. I think the coaches are doing a terrible job of putting him in a position to succeed.
Well, I guess that's the question then. What can be done?
You'd have to change the whole scheme. To be quite honest with you, they just asked way too much of their inside linebackers. And it made Ryan Shazier really special. Ryan Shazier was a special player. And I don't think people realize that. Devin Bush was never going to be Ryan Shazier. And they tried to make him be. Never was going to be. Bush has been brutally bad in all aspects. So much so that the things that he was good at, he is now bad at. And that's the thing. I don't know what you do to help him. He's really off the rails right now.
You send him to a sports psychologist because he's worried about the injury? I mean, I don't know.
Something like that. I think that this is a thing with Bush that you can't fix in 1 year. I think this is a thing he needs a whole offseason to marinate with. He needs a whole offseason to kind of work through, maybe get more confident. And usually, and this is just a science thing that I have researched consistently, the second year back from ACL surgery is when guys usually hit their stride. Okay. Maybe he gets his confidence back. Maybe it's the mental thing. Maybe it's a physical thing, but he can't tackle. He can't shed blocks. He can't cover. He can't do anything. But the real issue is here, who else do the Steelers have? Like people will say Robert Spillane.
Yeah.
Can I remind you what Robert Spillane did this preseason? Yeah. Like, can I remind you of that? He was absolutely toasted in that preseason. And while you might have a little bit of uptick in run defense, it's not going to be that much. And Bush, to his credit, at times has at least been decent in coverage. That's the best thing I can say about Devin Bush right now. He actually got matched up against Keenan Allen a few times today and actually did decent against him. But listen, it's a tough one with Bush. It's partially his own weaknesses. It's partially the injury. It's partially they're just not coaching him well. And it's partially mental stuff. It's a real bad storm, and it's all just coming to a head. And because of these injuries, they're asking him to do even more than he usually would. And as a result, he's looking even worse. So it's not much you can do with Devin Bush. They're going to decline his option. They're probably going to decline his option. And unless he has a magical switch where he's like, screw this, I don't care if I trust my knee or not. I'm just going to play 110 miles per hour with my hair afire. I don't care if I hit the wrong gap or not. That he's not going to get to another level. You really can't do much to help Devin Bush. It's tough. He's in a really tough spot.
I think he's in a tough spot. And I also think that, to your point about the second year after ACL, Devin Bush would have been best served this year to be under the radar of TJ Watt having a defensive player of the year type of season, have this defense be fully healthy, have the edge rushers there, have him be able to be the fourth or fifth impactful player on this defense and make plays in spotty times. But now that he's relied on to really step up and basically play at a Pro Bowl level for this defense to be able to be good because of everyone they're missing, that's a problem with a guy that has been so banged up. And for a while, and I was one of them in doing this, there was an argument that Devin Bush just wasn't healthy enough to be properly judged. He missed a year and a half after 2019, really setting the world on fire and impressing everybody. He memorized the plays upon stepping on the field in the practice facility. The guy felt like that middle linebacker that could lead your future, your franchise. They did a whole show on it a few years ago, but the injuries seemingly derailed him. But now he's not got over the injuries. It's been a long time since the injuries, and maybe he'll be better next year, but the Steelers can't afford to wait around. And when you do trade up for a guy, you're going to have the expectations of being a perennial Pro Bowler, even more so than Shazier. So he entered with more expectations than Shazier, who kind of came out of nowhere. Going into next week's game, though, here, Nick Farabaugh, Mike Asti here, Steelers post-game show, as we get close to wrapping things up, so we do eventually get some sleep. Of course, we have a lot to talk about. We could go on and on here for hours. The Steelers do lose to the Chargers 41-37. What are the keys to that game against Cincinnati? That one then will be on the road again, a little closer to home, but still on the road. Obviously, it's going to be a completely different game, you'd imagine, from the game earlier in the season. The Steelers just look totally different, for some good and for some bad, from that game earlier this year. You called it a must-win game for Pittsburgh. So what are your keys to that game? And if the Steelers win, what has happened? And if they lose, what has happened in that game moving forward?
Well, there's a few keys that they're going to have. First of all, they have to control the ground game, both sides of the football. Quite simply, they can't let Joe Mixon run. And quite simply, they need Najee Harris to have a decent game. Ball control is kind of how this team can maintain some sanity overall. And I'm saying this with the assumption that, they don't get TJ Watt and Minka and Hayden all back. I feel like at least one of those three is likely to miss the game. Maybe two of the three. So when you look at that, you just want ball control. But the run defense has been an issue all year, right? Outside of Cleveland, when they had a really good game, and that's really all they had to focus on. They didn't get Baker Mayfield any respect in that game. That was the big performance, and you thought the run defense was going to turn the corner. And then they came back the next week and got torched by the Lions. And frankly, today they got beat up pretty bad on the ground too. I know they didn't run the ball a ton, just like straight runs. I don't mean the Herbert runs, obviously. That's another thing they'll have to do. They'll have to contain Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow can scoot. And they really need to make sure that they don't let Burrow do what Herbert did tonight. Because,
it's a little similar. They can watch this tape almost to prepare for Burrow.
Exactly. It's a lot of the same things. And you have a similar running back in Joe Mixon, who's a great receiver, who's a real shifty guy. He's fast. He's similar to Eckler. Now, you also have a few really good receivers. You have Jamar Chase there. Chase had a big game last time against Pittsburgh, a big touchdown catch. I don't know who they're going to define as enemy number one this week. Assuming they get Minka back, and I think that the two that they would prefer to get back the most are Minka and TJ. I think they could survive without Hayden for a week or two more. I think Sutton played really well tonight, and I thought James Pierre, while he had his ups and downs, wasn't outright like, oh boy, he's awful. Yeah. Like, I think Pierre had some nice plays too.
I think they also knew going into the season they were going to miss Hayden for at least 4 or 5 weeks. I mean, with his age, you just pencil him out of the lineup for a bunch of games.
Exactly. So you have to find a way to figure out who's enemy number one. Who are we going to take out of the game? My guess, it's going to be Jamar Chase, and they're going to try to take him out, force Boyd, force Mixon, force those guys to beat him. And they certainly could beat him. But if you have guys like Watt, and you have Minka in there, I think you have a much better chance. So make sure Burrow doesn't get the key runs. Try to limit what Chase can do explosively. And more importantly, try to stop the ground game to a degree. Now, offensively, you got to keep the momentum going, right? I mean, the defense, the Bengals defense last time they faced, I think that was the real story of that game. The Bengals offense was decent against the Steelers defense in that game, but the Steelers offense was really, really anemic. And you need Ben to play at a really solid level. I won't say a high level. He doesn't necessarily need to play this level, but what you need him to do is move the sticks like he did tonight. Move them when you need him. Attack the middle of the field at a high level, because they're going to face a similar kind of safety from Derwin James to Jesse Bates. So if you can somehow create conflict in that middle of the field with those crossing routes, maybe that's something that you continue to kind of use. So I think that the biggest things are just going to be being able to keep ball control and limiting those explosive plays on the defensive side of the ball, and hopefully allowing you to at least play your game plan. And maybe you can win this one, like 28-24, hoping that your offense has continued that growth and you can maybe get a few explosive plays like you did today. So I think that's going to be big. If they win, I think you look at that. I think maybe they give up some big plays to a guy like Tyler Boyd, to someone like T. Higgins, maybe, who gets a few big catches. But overall, they slow down Chase. They make Burrow field them, and they get to Burrow. They don't really let him run. Mixon's kind of limited. The Bengals are going to find success. I'm pretty comfortable about this. They're going to find success offensively. But if they also can find success defensively is when you get into trouble. If the Steelers can kind of get Najee going, allow Ben to get in the comfort zone, hit a few plays to Claypool and Deontay like they did today, I think that's the big thing for Pittsburgh is that you have to get those two going. You have to get Deontay and Chase Claypool going through the air, and then that'll make them respect Najee Harris. Then you can get Najee Harris going. And I think that's kind of when you're going to go. And if they don't win, I think the offense is just going to revert back to what they have been all year, and the defense maybe a little shorthanded, just looks pretty bad. And overall, it's just going to be a really deflating game.
If it's first half Steelers, they probably don't have a chance. If it's second half Steelers, even with some injuries, they certainly would have a chance. It does appear, though, the Steelers, even while struggling in the first half against the Chargers, they did try to do what you're saying. They tried to get Deontay and Chase involved early to help Najee Harris. He got some yards in that first half. He didn't carry that over, including leaving with an injury in the second half, and then the offense did pick up. But this isn't college football where common opponents and all that matter for some rankings. However, the Bengals did beat up on the Raiders, who beat the Steelers, and the Bengals did it with Joe Burrow only throwing for 148 yards, despite them putting up 32 points on the board against the Raiders, who again beat the Steelers. And containing Mixon as one of your keys, well, the Raiders didn't do it. 30 carries, 123, an average of 4.1, 2 touchdowns, a 20-yarder. Boyd even had some on the ground. Burrow had some on the ground. Of course, nobody really had a big day as a receiver, but Boyd did get 6 catches, 49 yards, and Chase end up in the end zone. So Mixon almost single-handedly led their offense 2 points and got them a victory against the Raiders, who beat the Steelers. So it's easier said than done trying to contain, and certainly with the Steelers' injuries, the Bengals have a recipe here, and it will not get easier after the Cincinnati game, with then the Ravens figuring Lamar Jackson is back. They're even getting wins without him, and then beyond that. So these are critical games for the Steelers here. To put it lightly, they did look good in the second half. There is maybe a possibility of having a glass half full take here, as some I see in the chat are having, but they didn't win. And if you don't look like you did in the first half, you probably would have won despite the injuries, but every team is banged up. No one's going to feel bad for the Steelers, and they need to figure things out with who is on the actual field. Nick, I appreciate the time. I appreciate you staying up with me here. Any final thoughts? Because obviously there was a lot to unpack in this one. We cannot be on for 3 hours, but I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts. We're going to get more of your thoughts on the Steelers now throughout the week as well, with your takeaways, with commentary, etc. But just any other final thoughts here, reactionary thoughts for the show from this loss by the Steelers here on Sunday Night Football?
Yeah, and I think just kind of looking at, there were some positive things. And again, I think that second half is a potential building block for the Steelers. It's a building block that I don't think we have seen them get this year yet, especially offensively. They've had key little building blocks. The running game had a few week stretch there where they look solid, but they haven't had a half like this. This is new for them. This is something that I think they can build on, take to the next level, and eventually really get together an offense that looks decent to solid. And is a really competent threat. And that's kind of the big thing. The defense is obviously going to get better. The healthier they get, when they get TJ Watt back, when they get Minkah Fitzpatrick back, when they get Joe Hayden back, they're going to get all three back at some point this season. So it's going to come. The question is, can the offense potentially ride out that wave? Because the defense can look semi-bad next week if the offense looks like they did this week. Can Ben Roethlisberger and the offense carry the load? That's going to be what's key. But I do think that there's optimism to look at this and say, hey, while the Steelers have a really tough schedule coming up, if the offense can figure it out while the defense starts to get healthy, the Steelers could potentially really hit their hot hand down the stretch and potentially waltz into the playoffs here.
They could, and there's 7 spots. There's a lot of average teams out there. It's not exactly like these teams who are winning or even impressing anybody. There's also a lot of teams that are losing games they otherwise shouldn't lose. Look at the Titans. They're kind of blowing their whole positioning right now in the conference. There's still a roadmap and a path for the Steelers, but as you're mentioning, they have things they need to figure out. They need to get healthy. They even need to get healthier than some of these other teams because they cannot afford to deal with what's there right now. And there's reason to believe they could turn it around. They could be this team again. There's also the reason to believe they're not been consistent enough to prove that to you. And they don't have much room for error, even though they still have a lot in front of them in terms of at least getting into the postseason. Nick, That'll do it for this one. But again, a lot more I'm sure will be discussed this coming week by all of us here to take away from this game. This is one of those games, the way this unfolded, it's too bad this wasn't a 1 p.m. game because we could just be hammering out content all throughout the day talking about this game. We're going to let us get to bed here now, and we're going to start a new week with the Steelers losing again, as the Steelers do lose on Sunday Night Football now, back-to-back weeks, failing to get a win because they did tie Detroit, which eventually could come back to haunt them when they're trying to crawl into the playoffs. For Nick Farabaugh here, for all of us here at Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now, sorry to the rest of the chat I didn't get to, but again, we had a lot to discuss. I'm Mike Asti. The Steelers lose it Sunday Night Football. The trip to Los Angeles, despite Steelers Nation being there in full force with them, didn't go the way the Steelers would like, as